What is up, folks? Welcome back to the Repertoire Podcast. This is the Repertoire Report with Justin, Khanna and Ray Delucci. This is where we talk about industry news and we cover all sorts of insights from fine dining stuff to CPG stuff. And we're even going to talk about a restaurant tech story on a brand, a company that most of you all know that have this interesting, it's called a Trojan-horse strategy to try to get more restaurants onboarded, more penetration in to the guests that go and frequent some of these places. I know that we mostly wanted to start the show on kind of an unfortunate note. I wanted to specifically make this our first story because we had some really sad news coming out of France. The chef of Septime and other restaurants in that restaurant group, Chef Bertrand Grébaut, passed away. And it was just incredibly sad for a lot of people to hear of his passing happening for a bunch of us, like out of the blue. I don't have a personal connection with him, but he was 44 years old and he passed away in Paris on July 2nd. A publication out of Paris, Le Monde, reported that the cause was cancer, and his longtime partner in the restaurant announced the news publicly a couple of days later on Instagram, described Chef Bertrand as his best friend, his partner, and his brother. So a quick kind of summary, background, just some insights into who he was as a person. Chef Bertrand opened Septime in 2011 and earned a Michelin star in 2014. They actually were the number 11 restaurant on World's 50 Best in 2024 as a place that kind of bucked white tablecloth, traditional fine dining, especially in a city like Paris, where French gastronomy, they called it like bistronomy, which I maybe don't necessarily subscribe to that word, but I do think that there is a differentiation that he had with his food and his cuisine and his philosophy of all these things. And I did want to actually highlight something that came up in my research today, which, if true, is absolutely worth sharing, in my opinion, which is the push that Chef Bertrand had in recent years towards focusing on the well-being of his teams, both in Septime and then all of the other establishments that he was a partner in. And what sources have kind of shared on this is that this kind of showed in the culture of the kitchen. And he adjusted work hours and all of these things that, you know, to the stereotypical French chef may not apply, but I think that he was very forward thinking in a lot of these things just to make sure that the team could execute at their best. And then ideally it would show in the experience that the guests would have. And this is kind of echoed in things that Danny Meyer would talk about. And so to see it like really operationalized is really, really exciting. And so I just wanted to take a beat to, you know, acknowledge that this happened, but then also like applaud him for doing that, because it's something I personally want to kind of see more of, this idea of like being successful and doing right by your people. I don't think it needs to be an or. And so we're going to link this story in the show notes. I was actually just reminiscing on his cooking. I've only been to Clamato, which is his seafood focused concept. I was actually watching a old Action Bronson video, Ray, on Action Bronson and a couple friends kind of going in to Septime, and Chef Bertrand and the team cooked for him. And it is this, you know, obviously he has the name of his show, which is the F That's Delicious, but it is just this consistent, like mind-blowing flavor combinations and ingredient execution and quality of product and all of this stuff that really kind of gets you an insight into what he was all about, just cooking for a foretop and having fun. And so we'll link that in the show notes too, if you know, you're interested in maybe coping with this in a reminiscing kind of way. I don't know if you have thoughts on seeing this, not to totally start the show off in such a somber note, but I do think that like the age of this happening, you know, cancer sucks. I've had, you know, dear family members of mine pass away from cancer. And so I you know, maybe have a more personal connection to that side of the story. But yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on this passing.
Yeah, you know, definitely sad. Wasn't too familiar with his work, but to see someone give their career and life to serving others, I mean, that's just commendable in and of itself. Life is fleeting. That's why I have Memento Mori tattooed on my arm. You know, death will come at some point for us all, and it's just sad. And I hope that the impact and the motives he pushed for, you know, continue on through not only his restaurant, but French cuisine or the French food space. But yeah, it's just sad. I mean, there's no other way around it. I mean, to just lose someone so young to a disease that sometimes is curable in a sense, but like sometimes you can be cancer free, and then sometimes it just like takes a turn for the worse. I've had those similar experience in my own life. So, yeah, not every day is promised, and it's just cool to at least see that he made the most of the time he had.
If any of you folks have either worked for Chef Bertrand's companies or had exposure to him, and you want to kind of give a shout out in the comments, we'd obviously love to read those things in a hopefully like respectful way to kind of commemorate him. So rest in peace, Chef. Hard to transition from these stories every single time we do them, but I did want to transition to this next story that we had kind of go crazy on our feeds, I think, because of Ray and I's algorithms with all of these things. We're going to pop it up on screen and play this clip from the Go To Food podcast where Mario Carbone was on the show, basically talking about the hook of this clip is why Michelin are lying to you. So we'll play this clip, and then Ray and I kind of want to share our thoughts here.
Couldn't care about it.
No.
Don't care about it at all. I think if you start cooking for stars and you forget that there's customers on the other side of the equation, you're in trouble. I also find it hard to believe that Michelin is what they say they are. It's pretty inconceivable to me in this day and age that they're still anonymous and they still go to all of these restaurants every year to check on them. Do you know the payroll that would be necessary for Michelin to do that?
Insane.
And in this day and age, we don't know who these people are with modern technology and everyone having a camera on their phone. How is it not just an algorithm? Because I'm sure there are some critics, but if you look at the overall revenue of Michelin and selling books.
Love a good Michelin conspiracy.
I got to jump in here, man, first, because I watched this and I was like, this is so hilarious to me that to no disrespect to Mario Carbone. I have eaten at Teresi, big fan of that restaurant. We kind of had some comments up on screen that you can maybe see on the sidebar. I'll kind of go into those because there was some big voices chiming in here to this conversation. Ray, you and I talk about this concept of, oh my God, it's so exorbitantly expensive to bring the Michelin guide to this city. And then we will have this person saying there's no way that they have enough budget to do these sorts of things. And so my question to him is like, which is it? Is it too expensive? Like the Top Jaw account, the literal host of the Knife Edge show on Apple TV, said Michelin don't make revenue by selling guidebooks. They did in the 1920s, but not now. They make money through brand sponsorships and annual fees from the regions. For example, Texas paid Michelin $2.7 million to bring the guide to their state. New Zealand paid $3.8 million. Tourism boards fund it. Hardly a conspiracy, end quote. And so you'll have people that'll look at these amounts and they'll say, oh my God, this is insane that these numbers, these 7-figure numbers are being touted around. By the way, most times these large sums of money are amortized over a multi-year contract. So that's, in and of itself, 9 times out of 10, a deal, quote unquote, for any of these geographical areas for the dining tourism itself that it's going to bring, in addition to some of the other benefits that I've talked about with talent wanting to go to that city. Is Michelin trying to sell, he calls them magazines, which I think is hilarious. Like, is the guide trying to sell physical copies of books in the Great Lakes region of the United States? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, but they are expanding there. And on top of that, it really goes back to some of my points on, and we can maybe touch on the New Zealand news. It is another example of Michelin entering a market, and they are not dishing out stars in the way that some of these people sometimes like to say that Michelin does it, which is, oh, you get a star, and the only we're giving out stars like candy for free, or like in a irresponsible way, because we want to have success or have stars in a geographical area. That's not how it works. There is not a 3 Michelin starred restaurant in New Zealand. It might change over time. It is something where take some of the other examples that we've seen over recent months with Michelin taking the 3-star accolade away from some of these restaurants and teams. I find it hard to believe that, quote unquote, an algorithm, like what does that mean? Do you know what I mean? Like, are they, if you're going to go, like, please go into specifics like that if you're going to make that type of accusation. Do you know what I mean? Like, provide the evidence that you can say, I'm just hypothesizing here in a way that would actually make me be able to fact check this. XYZ restaurant is bombing their Google reviews, getting a certain number of critics to write blog posts or written critiques on this so that we show up better in an SEO way, or something that a scrapable piece of tech could go on and say, oh my goodness, this restaurant happens to be a hot restaurant in a way that maybe it wasn't before. And Michelin's quote unquote algorithm is going to get a sense of that and then make that be something that they give stars to or decide to expand to. It just doesn't compute for me any of the things that he's saying here. The cost piece is wrong. The algorithm piece is wrong. The anonymity of the inspectors, I think, has been widely talked about in the sense of they don't allow these critics to go and say, oh, I was like the person who wrote that from France, basically recollection of this was my experience as a Michelin inspector. He was facing like lawsuits. There was all sorts of stuff. You have to probably sign tons and tons of contracts in a way that World's 50 Best is pretty open about the fact that they have like a whole taste hunters program. You have people in their bio listing that I work for World's 50 Best in some capacity and maybe it's not exactly paid in the way that Michelin kind of does it. But the Michelin Guide is pretty buttoned up in the way that they do their evaluations. There have been documented examples. I have worked in restaurants where there is varying levels of confidence that certain guests are from the Michelin Guide based on the way that people have seen individual people traveling around town on a particular visit. This was apparent for us because we were in a kind of sleepy town on the west coast of Norway, and this person who was dining around as a single diner from the UK, do you know what I mean? Like there was enough kind of like ticked boxes where you look at the pattern of behavior here or the details of this individual and you say, I think based on the fact that the guide is coming out in a certain number of months and this person is dining out around town and they don't have that much history. They maybe have like a very interesting backstory when you ask them about why are you, you try to connect with them at the table and they're, maybe a little bit mysterious intentionally or maybe in kind of an awkward way. There's some of this stuff that you can kind of get, but it is one of those funny things where show me the examples. Do you know what I mean? Like show me the evidence of what this, Mario Carbone's saying here. Like show me oh my God, it's so obvious that this person is a Michelin inspector and they're trying to be anonymous, but they're not. You see examples of very well-known publications where the food critic goes under their own name, and because of the way that they decide to prune their representation or visualization online, we don't know what their face is. We literally covered that story a couple weeks back, Ray, where that well-known food critic finally showed their face. And so it's not something that's impossible to do, especially as we're talking about probably hundreds of Michelin inspectors all over the world that they're doing some of this stuff with. And so I agree with the Top Shot team here where the business model has fundamentally changed. And if anything, I think that should be studied from Michelin. Their ability to pivot and still have the guide keep going and maintain at least some semblance of standards. I will dunk on Michelin when they mess up. I am not paid by Michelin, like I'm not all for Michelin all the time. But I think that it is funny that you will have both sides of this argument getting mad and upset and spouting their peanut gallery takes in a way that just doesn't match the facts. I don't know if you had thoughts on this.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because on the one hand, you're right, the funding piece doesn't add up. We just covered this with the Great Lakes and Buffalo being excluded, that they weren't willing to pay. That's obviously a big funding arm. But I think that I think why this caught fire, and I think why some people like would go along with agreeing and like dunking on Michelin, is the fatal flaw that I think the Michelin Guide has when it comes to basing. It's like when you base your career on trying to chase a Michelin star. I've done tons of content on this, and the uncomfortable reality is that Michelin inspectors are anonymous, and the system is mysterious, and it's up to interpretation. And we don't know if it's a Michelin star chef or a Michelin star restaurant. They will contend it's a Michelin star restaurant, but then how they rate sometimes will be in contention with the chef itself. And I think that it finds the flaw in the Michelin Guide where it's like, this is why I always have cautioned anyone chasing these accolades. It's like you should be making the food that speaks to you in a way that's profitable, in a way that can allow your team to succeed. And if it is fine art, then go for that. But just getting this one accolade from an anonymous review company that we have all this shrouded mystery around, it can be challenging. And when people don't get that, it's easy for them. And I'm not saying this of him, but it's easy for people to be like, oh well, it's probably all just like an algorithm, and it's easy to get rid of. And I have seen more Michelin backlash as the years have gone on, and I think it is because of the lack of transparency. And in an age where there's so much that you can actually go look up, to not have any information still makes, it allows like items like this to go. Now, do I think that he is? I've seen comments where he was like, "Oh, he's just mad, doesn't have a star anymore, doesn't have a star." I don't think he's really hurting for a star. I think the CPG brand they've built alone is like fine, and I think he'd much rather have what he's built now than the accolades of one Michelin star. But at the same time, it was very interesting to see like the algorithm. It was almost like a Matrix-esque. The algorithm is taking over and they're rating everything. Now, do I think there's probably some sort of automation and technology in 2026? Yeah, of course. Why not? It is pretty incredible to me though. Like still that no, not really anyone has come out. Like you the one errant inspector here or there, but to know no one is pretty incredible. And it does leave just that bit of doubt to allow something like this to really take hold online.
That I can sometimes maybe agree with or empathize with, which is the multiple visits element. I know that New York Times is pretty open with the number of visits that they have had at a restaurant when they review it. Sometimes the food critic themselves will admit this in the piece. Oh, at my first visit, I was able to experience this, and then that was maybe off, or it improved in the second visit and the third visit. And they will sometimes vary table size. So I went with as a 2-top, and then I went with a 4-top later, and then I went back as a single diner and sat at the bar, something like that, to kind of get a full picture of what a concept might be. And what I have talked about in the stories that we see with restaurants getting Michelin stars incredibly fast. So we covered that story on Lilo. There was that other restaurant in New York City, which is, I think, something after like 4 or 5 months, they were able to get a Michelin star. It was a Japanese concept, and they like have that in the chef's bio. It's like fastest restaurant in New York City to get a Michelin star or something like that.
Have you been? Is there any restaurants you've been back Michelin rated that you've gone more than once?
Um,
That you can think of?
yeah,
I have
Lazy Bear,
one.
not Lazy Bear, Staper Provisions. I've been there, 5 or 6 times.
I've been to Boca
Yeah,
more than once.
Alinea,
Chicago.
been to Alinea twice, Saison, per se.
Do you think maybe like a Boca for me, like it's 1-star level still? That feels like a restaurant that really it's a restaurant that has incredible cooking. I'll say it's some of, if not the best cooking in Chicago. That Michelin star really elevates that dining experience to where it's like it does. I feel like it takes them over a certain edge. Where if they didn't have that, they'd be a really good restaurant, but it would feel like they're missing out. Like that 1-star just kind of pushes them forward.
Yeah,
And I think what I saw reading a lot of the comments was like the stuffiness of Michelin or like the ego of Michelin or whatnot. But it's like I think that there are some really good restaurants that you shouldn't just avoid Michelin starred restaurants. That being said, I think there's obviously issues with it, or you could have certain egotistical restaurants. But like Boca for me is a perfect example of a restaurant that, and I don't know their financials, but in terms of popularity and how long they've been around, that is extremely great at technically cooking food, and the Michelin star really adds to that and like backs up their cooking and like makes you want to go more than once.
yeah. I liked you didn't say this directly, but it's almost like the Michelin star being a side effect of running a really great,
Yeah.
I call it an experience engine. I've used that analogy before, but it's really just like a great hospitality experience or great restaurant. Decide what label you want.
And when
to
I
use.
go there, I can't really like, I don't know what more I would expect out of a restaurant.
Sure.
And that's
sure.
where like the 3, it's like and I've been to the 3 stars, but it's like not many. It's not like a flex, but like Boca's one of those restaurants. Like it's just, to me, I don't know where else I would go, or
Yeah.
what else I would ask for from that experience.
The consistency piece, I've mentioned this before, is can you have something like consistency inside of a tasting menu? Like inside of one experience. So if you're going to go to a sushi counter and you're going to say like, okay, consistency across seasoning, consistency across aesthetic presentation, consistency across service of a, you know what I mean? You're going to do wine pairings or something like that, where you can have inconsistency inside of I've had this at even restaurants in Chicago on a recent trip that I had, where it was like the beginning of the meal and then like the right before the dessert was awesome. But then there was stuff in the middle where it was just like, oh my God, this is not a good experience. And so you can have even inconsistencies or consistency inside of a single experience. And I'm not saying that that is exclusively what Michelin should use, because you can obviously have these off nights, which I think is also the thing that these people in the comments who are saying, I went to a 1-star place, I went to a 3-star place, even a 2-star place, and I didn't have a good experience. Therefore, swear off Michelin, say that it's not worth it, say that it's a clown show, they're, like the snake oil, blah, 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 blah. I think any of us who have lived through one of those off nights in a restaurant, it is really, really debilitating. It's really hard because it's like there is a standard that's set. There are expectations that diners are bringing. There is a lot of tumultuousness and turbulence that you experience behind the scenes when you have a night like that. It's multifactorial. It's sometimes not just one thing that causes one of those off nights, but it is one of those funny things where are you going to make the argument that a single off night is going to be grounds for a, Michelin star to be lost, or multiple even? I think that we kind of covered the story with Alinea losing their 3rd star, where it was not a situation of just one bad visit from Michelin. It was like they did not take that situation lightly, and they made sure to visit multiple times, at least reportedly, when they were making that decision. Can we confirm or deny that with like, this was the inspector, this is their name, this is the day and time that they ate, and this is the menu that they got, and this was the team that was cooking at that time? I don't know.
Tomorrow, and I guess maybe to play devil's advocate, or not even that, but like, I actually thought about Alinea too. It's like, what do you do if you're them? Like, what's the answer to gaining the 3rd star back? Because in an argument, you could claim they've been consistent to be able to have a Michelin star for so long, but then the process change or the expectations change. Like, you kind of have to buck consistency or rebuild whatever that consistency was. So I think to put a point in it though, for the Mario point, is like, I think as long as Michelin is as ambiguous as it is, you'll always have a portion of the industry that does that. And while I don't agree with the conspiracy, I do like the attitude of like, there's other ways to be super successful and gain notoriety in cooking in 2026 beyond the Michelin Guide. And I did appreciate that type of air of him, even if it was, with like selling the magazines and whatnot.
And I mean, this had 10,000 likes alone on Instagram. And so we just wanted to cover it because it was an interesting take that I think helps to dispel some of these myths that you sometimes hear. Let's transition into another story. We didn't talk about going in this direction, Ray, but I think this is a maybe good dovetail. I am calling this Ascending SF, Descending NYC. And I want to kind of give some context behind that and the reason why. I would love for you folks to join me at an upcoming event that I'm going to be speaking at. Shout out to the team at 7 Shifts for partnering on this. It's going to be a free live event on July 21st. That is a Tuesday. And this event is all focused on a topic that we've discussed here on this show numerous times, and it's all about what restaurant employees want in 2026. And no, this is not us telling you what to want. This is actually a deeper dive on the data that 7 Shifts gathered for more than 1,000 restaurant employees, going beyond your typical boring survey questions. These are juicy questions on topics like difficult managers and the camaraderie that you have with your coworkers, and benefits beyond just things like staff meal at work, as well as like the real cost of someone leaving the team if you're an operator, if you're in a leadership position. And this is the stuff that you kind of care about, but you necessarily haven't put numbers to it, or you know that it's something that you're struggling with and you haven't exactly been able to cut through the noise or actually implement a solution. And yes, I contributed to the report itself, which is free to read, but I'll also be sharing insights in this event that I have not shared inside of this report. I might have touched on some of these topics in multiple episodes on the show, but this is going to be all in one place because they actually have a really exciting docket that 7 Shifts has put together, and we're going to be running through that. They have really good questions that they're going to be asking. And as I was looking at the questions, I took some interesting notes. There's going to also be time for a Q&A at the end, and so that's even more of a reason to join live and make sure that you're there. Register using the link in the show notes below or scan the QR code on screen now if you're on YouTube. Tuesday, July 21st at 11. Just a quick reminder on the timing there. I'll obviously be there live. I hope to see you folks there live. And thanks to 7 Shifts for sponsoring this episode. I am calling this Ascending SF, Descending NYC. I kind of gave the answer away here, Ray, but if you're a normie, you're the person who is maybe not so inclined to go to fine dining places, or you're just now getting into caring about food and chefs and restaurants, what would you say is like the peak or number one city in the U.S. for fine dining specifically?
Oh, New York. Well, yeah, New York City.
New York. It's funny because New York held that real estate in my mind as well for the longest time. And if we use the Michelin Guide as like the hard data point by which we're measuring this, 3 Michelin stars specifically, the Bay Area has been ascending and New York City has been descending. This is kind of taken away from, I don't know if you follow Balaji Srinivasan's work at all, but he has this idea of like ascending India, descending U.S. is usually what he kind of and sometimes Europe is what he throws in there.
I've heard of Balaji, but I haven't seen this.
Well, he just has this idea of, there's these areas of the world that are, if you look across, specific metrics on either GDP growth or their manufacturing base or insert the thing, there is like a life expectancy, happiness surveys. There's certain areas that are, ascending and certain areas that are declining or descending. And it was just very interesting to me as somebody who, again, even in the zeitgeist, we're talking about the cultural answer that people would give. New York City is still like, that's the place where fine dining is. That's where Wall Street is. That's, if you want to make it and you want to have the, Anthony Bourdain's restaurant, blah, 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 blah. There is some actually interesting data that I don't think we've necessarily explicitly covered on the show before. We might have mentioned it when the Michelin Guide, kind of comes out here. But it was around this like 2016, 2017, 2018. You had this very interesting moment in the Bay Area specifically. I'm lumping the Bay Area in. I know that I'm talking about SF as its own city, and maybe that's the argument that somebody's going to make in the comments here.
Like, are we including like single thread as well, or no?
Yeah, Sonoma, Yountville, do you know what I mean? Like, as you're talking about some of these restaurants, it's kind of like, well, it's not technically SF, and so you can't like go for a vacation in SF and just kind of take an Uber to all these individual places. You have to do the 1 to 2 hour, like drive to get to some of these places in wine country if you're going to decide to go north from San Francisco. So I understand that. The number of 3 Michelin star restaurants in New York City in 2023 was just 4 places. 11 Madison Park, Le Bernardin, Massa, and Per Se. In 2023, the Bay Area had 5 restaurants that had 3 Michelin stars.
Yep.
And this year, New York City has 5 3 Michelin star restaurants, and the Bay Area now has 7. And so this kind of happened in 2018 where it was in New York, Chef's Table at Brooklyn Fair, 11 Madison Park, Le Bernardin, Massa, and Per Se. And for San Francisco, it was Benu, Qua, French Laundry, Manresa, Quince, Restaurant at Meadowood, and Cezanne, which is interesting to see that San Francisco has had this like tumultuousness with, Manresa closing, Cezanne losing stars, Meadowood having a fire, Qua closing or changing, like they changed chefs, and then it was this whole, tumultuousness there. It's just kind of an interesting way for me to actually talk about the guide happening and the stars getting awarded these past 2 weeks in California. Huge shout out to the 2 new 3-star places in California, and Close and Californios, both earning 3 Michelin stars. And also just quick shout out, this is not in 3 Michelin star land, but friend of the show, John Yao, has a restaurant called Cato in LA, and they finally got 2 stars. I did a This Place Called episode at that restaurant, and I say in my voiceover for that episode, I'm pretty sure that this needs to get this is a 2-star restaurant, just kind of like chilling here, and it only has 1 star. And so it's been cool to see him like evolve his cuisine since my meal there, and then finally getting this recognition that I personally believe him and his team deserve. So I just wanted to kind of pose that as an interesting insight that genuinely might change how you plan out your career, like trying to make this practical for you. If the 3 Michelin starred world is what you're focused on, to your point, Ray, California is just objectively the place to be right now. This line of I cooked in fine dining in New York City, I still think holds weight like to the normie person, to, if that's the I know like Ray, when you and I were coming up, it was like cooking in Paris and fine dining held this like this air to it. You know what I mean? There was this kind of intensity. There was this tradition. There was this almost like if you can make it in Paris, you can make it anywhere. And that kind of applies, I think, to New York. I have a very close friend of mine who kind of like, we went to CIA together, and he never cooked in New York. And he ultimately made it to being a sous chef at a 2 Michelin star restaurant in New York. And that was like, he checked that off of his quote unquote career bucket list for himself.
Even just a stage in New York is like a big deal. Like, I remember my first stage at Terra, like that, just being able to do that felt like an accomplishment.
Yeah, that's why I would take the train down to the city from CIA, because I thought it was like, you're going to get this experience that people would kill for, and I could just do it for free on a weekend. I know that, not to get into the staging conversation too hard here, but like, I don't think again, talking about culture, talking about how you can flex this experience. I cooked in fine dining in San Francisco. I don't know, like it's still, contrary to the objective metrics of the hotbed of fine dining that is the Bay Area, it does not hold the cultural weight, at least in the way that I'm thinking about it. Maybe to us industry people, you're talking about you went and you cooked at Benu, or, you cooked at insert the place. It does not have the same, air to it, or the same. It's not the flex that I think cooking and fine dining in New York is, which is just so interesting to me. And we can probably wax poetic for another hour on why. I think in California, like, the product is different. I think the clientele is different. I think the spaces that they create, like the actual architecture of the restaurant, is different. I think the attitude of the kitchen environment is different. And there are also factors outside of, the restaurant's creativity that I think contribute to this, with Silicon Valley being right there in the Bay Area, where like there's this huge amount of wealth, as we talk about the K-shaped economy, that is like geographically located for making an interesting opportunity for chefs to post up and say, hey, this is where you can find us. And so, pardon the pun, but like all the ingredients are there for this stuff to happen. And so don't get it twisted. I'm not, giving career advice that you should ditch New York City wholesale immediately and just only set your eyes on San Francisco or LA. But when you add these places in Southern California, the Addisons of the world, the Somnis of the world, other 3-star places, the talent in California as a state is really hard to argue with. And having worked and staged in both geographical areas, I can say that they have their pros and cons, which maybe we can get into in the comments if you folks want to chime in here. I don't know if you have thoughts on this idea, kind of dovetailing off of this, Michelin maybe not being the most credible source. I just wanted to use it as a barometer, so to speak, to measure these two coasts of the U.S., to kind of talk about where we're currently at and say, guys, California is really beating New York in this, objective way.
Yeah, I think that over time, obviously, things will change. Like like you said, New York had this huge cultural heritage. It had the, Bourdain effect. It had all these different, different cool stories. And I feel like even in 2015, I remember like, going to school, obviously at CIA, like there's just a ton of things going on in the city. Like I remember Chef's Table came out with Ivan Orkin and wanted to go to his ramen spot. Like there's a lot of New York City centric items. But then, you go eat at a restaurant like Single Thread and you think like it's like the best like food you could probably ever eat in terms of like a restaurant setting. So yeah, I mean, I think over time, I think California will probably win out. I think both have the same issue though of cost. It's very expensive to go cook or to commit to cook in either of those locations. So I'd be interested if in like 10 to 15 years, we're talking about a city with a little bit more cost of living. I wonder if there's a city that could, and I know they do exist now in some sense, but I wonder if there's going to be like a dominant food city that we are not going to expect, that actually is like cost of living. And it's like a mecca for people to go learn how to cook and like open restaurants in, that isn't California or New York.
I think taking into account some of these things that I touched on might get you closer if you're trying to think about building that type of ecosystem or environment. It's like the product has to be good, the clientele that's willing to pay has to be there, and then obviously the recognition that's going to be that arbiter of quality, like a Michelin guide being there. And that's why it seems like I'm constantly harping on this idea of being excited about Michelin expanding to certain places, but I do think that it is a critical piece of a area doing well in the fine dining context of like, we really want to be world class or be in the conversation with some of these other big players.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do next?
Let's do some weekly Reddit advice. This is a good one. I thought you'd be able to answer. So this was from, I think it was Line Cook Reddit. Yes. I'll read the question. I'll give a quick follow up, and then Justin, I want to get your thoughts. So the idea of basically is how to get out of a lack of a passion rut. So this person writes, hey, I'm an apprentice to become a chef, and I'm doing my second year of 3 to get my degree. I always enjoyed cooking, not even for the end product, but just the steps, consistency, and how you can make a lot from barely anything. I work at a rather high-end hotel, and it was nice in the beginning. I learned a lot, and I had fun. But now after 2 years, it is just exhausting to be there. I still like cooking, but just not in the restaurant. It's just dull now. Repetitive recipes. No one really teaches anything anymore. I am there to learn, and I want to learn. I ask about stuff and get told I'm asking too much. It just kills the drive. But now it's starting to affect my home life. I expected the job to be exhausting and time-consuming. I like the company of books well enough, so I had no real problem with my social life. But even on my days off, I just don't want to put in the effort into cooking or recipes, really. I used to love writing them down like an addict. I could do that for hours. Now I barely manage to motivate myself to do that once or twice a month. I'd love to challenge myself to cook. Hell, even now I do that when I see something special ingredient I haven't used before, but it's not as often. It's making me sad, frankly. Has anyone else dealt with this? Just trying to learn, getting your drive killed, and it creeping into your personal life. And I just want to say that I resonated a lot with this because this was me right before COVID. I was working for a restaurant group. I was in a managerial position, probably too young to be in that position. And it was so much work. It was so much effort to the point where I really just wanted to like lay around all day on my days off. Like my days off, my highlights consisted of going to Whole Foods, the grocery shop. I would get like a roll of sushi from the local sushi restaurant. I would read a book, and I could tell you I was reading Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss at the time. And then I would go to bed because I had to be up super early to get back to the restaurant, which I would spend 14 to 15 hours that day, and then do that for like extended period of time. And I think like burnout's a real thing. And I think when you start to really notice it is when it affects the day to day of your life. I also think that there's something in there that I caught, Justin, where it's like they say people used to teach me, but now it's not fun anymore, and no one's really teaching you. And that shows me that maybe your management staff is burned out, or they've kind of let themselves slip on what it means to like be a dynamic managerial staff. So those are some of the tones I picked up on and kind of resonated with, but wondering your thoughts on this and any advice you might have.
One point that came up, which kind of reflects on a previous Reddit section we've done on the show before, is what I would say to this person is some people would kill to have this problem. I'm specifically thinking about that guy who's like, I have 6 weeks of experience and I'm faking it till I make it. Like
Yeah.
to have 2 years of experience at a fine dining, nice hotel, and like you have relatively gotten to a place of what I kind of jokingly call total station domination, but like seriously call total station domination in the sense of people would kill to be where you're at, dude. Like you can coast at work. Like you are not getting dominated on your station in a way that some people experience at work. And so that's kind of like a cool place to be. And you're not maybe the most engaged, or like you're not feeling like progress is being made. You're not getting as much dopamine from your job as you might have gotten in earlier times. But it is not something where you're getting slammed every single night and you're getting burnout from a different set of problems. I'd be curious to also hear about what is keeping this person there. I know that hotels often offer a large suite of benefits that sometimes have their detractors. This person's qualms are a laundry list of those. But if you're getting paid really well at the hotel, it can be this set of golden handcuffs that it's like, I'm looking to go down the street to this place that is maybe a little more ambitious. I could learn some more techniques, but I'm going to be taking a pay cut. Maybe I'm going to lose something like the great health insurance I have at this hotel that I'm working for.
Does it maybe apply to this? Like, do you think this person's based in the U.S. given the apprenticeship path?
Maybe.
Like,
Maybe.
they have a 3-year apprenticeship like that.
Yeah.
Is that
Could
through the
be.
hotel? Is that like,
Could
what is
be.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the culinary program that they would be in. And they might be calling apprentice because maybe that's what the hotel calls it, to do like an externship. I don't know. There's a bunch of different funny language that maybe doesn't do the role exactly justice here. But hotels also sometimes offer like really great lifestyle perks here.
Mhm.
Like even on my days off, like there's some restaurants that, don't offer that much time off in a way that, you actually have capacity to want to kind of do stuff. Another piece that I kind of wanted to touch on for this person is the hungriness and the desire for novelty in technique and recipe
Mhm.
is something that can sometimes be antithetical to what the restaurant needs to do. And I think I've mentioned this on the show before, so apologies if I'm repeating myself, but it's this idea of we have something that's working at the restaurant. And so our job is to actually consistently deliver on that over and over and over again. It is not to change this and add a pasta program and decide we're going to do our own bread now and all of a sudden change the type of sauces that we're making and switch up the type of fish that we're serving, which for the culinary team is what they want because it's more learning. It's recipe development. It's new techniques. It's new products coming in. And all of that's really exciting, but it's confusing for the clientele. You know what I mean? Like for the person who's coming in and saying, oh, I thought you guys were known for this thing. Why aren't you doing that anymore? Like the answer that ownership is going to give is, oh, our line cooks got bored. You know what I mean? Like that's not necessary. Like you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that there is a repetitiveness to this particular role that you might be in that makes it so that there's other people who tout the benefits of this. Like you can achieve mastery in something like pasta making or shucking oysters or butchery, insert the thing, sauce making, because it has this repetitive nature to it. And so you can get really, really good at this thing, and people settle into those roles and become, again, masters at that craft for years. I just wanted to touch on this idea of there are other skills you can develop in this maybe organization in a future role that you could have in this company if you decide to stop focusing on just recipe and technique as a thing that you can learn. So Ray, I know, and I too talk about this idea of like paying attention to finances, managing people, communication, all of these things that are going to matter if you want to have different roles. I'm not saying everybody has to or needs to, but if you have your eyes set on, I want to have my own thing, spend some extra time asking your sous chef about inventory. Ask about, hey, can I cost XYZ dish out? Can I, take a look at some of the invoices? And, like maybe that's something you can do where you're getting a little bit of that feeling of progress in your career and your skill set development. Obviously, I'm putting my repertoire bias hat on here, but it is something that I did myself in my own career. And it certainly helped in those contexts when I was like, okay, I'm not going to get this thing that I still might be craving. I also have touted the benefits sometimes on keeping your job because it gives you those things that you are enjoying and take advantage of, but then using some of that free time to get that creative inspiration itch scratched. So you're staging on your days off. You take some vacation time, and maybe you have a 10-day vacation that you're going to take, and you go to the beach for 6 days, and then you spend 3 days going and staging somewhere. Like, is there something to that type of arrangement? And you're going to pepper these throughout your year so that you always have something to look forward to creatively, where you're going to get exposure to a new kitchen environment, a new menu, a new chef's philosophy. And some of that stuff can allow you to have the best of both worlds in this stage when you feel like a undersaturated sponge and you're like, I just want more stuff. I want to learn more. Like, give me more thrown at me. And so that is something where, when you're an apprentice and you're maybe you're not thinking that managerially or leadership-y or entrepreneurially yet, but it is something where if you can at least get some exposure to it, it can sometimes feel really good. And then the last thing on this is this, I'm calling this like the comparison trap. So like if you're going on Instagram and you're seeing, oh my goodness, this person's posting about this new technique that I don't have experience with at work, or I don't get to do that at my job. I've certainly been in those types of environments, maybe not so much fueled by social media, literally fueled by looking across the kitchen and seeing somebody cooking fish. And that was the only thing that I wanted to do at that restaurant, was learn how to cook fish. And I didn't have the opportunity yet because I wasn't getting promoted fast enough. Get clear on your goals. Like, play your own game, compete against yourself as opposed to this comparing yourself with everybody around you. And then if you do that, like, could that potentially serve as a salve to what you're feeling in this frustrating kind of way? That was also something that I just wanted to mention, because if you can get really clear on, I have goals to do this, and this, and then reflect it on, what is my job description? What does my role and responsibilities look like now? And if those things don't match up, then maybe it's, you might be stuck in this apprentice position for right now, but like, put a deadline on it, right? Like, you're going to say, okay, my apprenticeship at this restaurant is going to end at this day, and I just need to make it through to this time to fulfill my commitment. And then you can start to look forward to, okay, I need to start to do some job hunting and try to find an opportunity that's going to more align with my current goals. Like, me competing with myself, I think has served me really well in this season of like, Ray, when I graduated CIA, everybody was, questioning my decision to go into fine dining Michelin, because it was like, hey, look at this country club that I get to be, junior sous chef at right out of culinary school, and I'm getting paid all this money, and I have the title, and I have my name embroidered on my chef coat. And I was like, literally trying to tell myself to not care about that. Like, it was not like this instant, oh my goodness, I'm a savant at this. It was hard, because it's like you have these other people who are like, you have doubt in yourself as a young professional. And you're looking at that and you're saying, should I be wanting that? Am I making the wrong decision? But it really comes back to like, play your own game, get clear on what your goals are. And for me, that was like, I wanted a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And so it was very easy for me to put the horse blinders on and say, nope, I don't care about that. I'm making the right call here. And you can just kind of go forward here. This is particularly timely for me because I have a notepad on my desk here where I'm working through a series of coaching tracks that I'm looking to offer going forward. And so if achieving a particular set of goals or solving a problem for yourself would be interesting and you want to work together in an ongoing capacity, like we offer that. And so we'll leave that link in the description.
Next up is this, just a quick story that we're going to throw in here, is this ultra processed lawsuit being dismissed. So this was an article out of Food Dive, and basically this is a lawsuit in which that was dismissed because basically there's another win for the packaged food industry. We covered about this idea that ultra processed foods were going to garner lawsuits or legal action, and that consumers were going to try to sue food companies due to the ultra processed nature of foods and their negative health effects. So they say that over the past year, manufacturers have, basically won this and also successfully blocked labeling laws in Texas and an artificial dye ban in West Virginia. And they go on to say that this ruling bodes poorly for another closely watched lawsuit against ultra-processed food manufacturers filed in April of this year. This one looks at tying consumers' health issues to ultra-processed ingredients by including a long list of products consumed over their lifetime. The specific Pennsylvania case that was dismissed showed that simply naming ultra-processed products consumed isn't enough to prove that they cause harm. They go on to say that Martinez amended his complaint, who is the person that filed this. His complaint to list 179 products he ate throughout his childhood and the frequency with which he consumed them. He claimed that the ingredients in products like Kraft American cheese drove, quote, internal dysbiosis and systemic inflation, which affected organ function and desensitized his insulin receptor signaling. The correlation between the rise in UPFs and the rise in childhood diseases like type 2 diabetes does not amount to causation in the plaintiff's individual circumstances, the court ruled. Martinez also failed to establish how each of the 179 products listed contributed to his health issues, claiming that all ultra-processed ingredients cause identical health issues regardless of the frequency of consumption. In this dismissal, the judge wrote that the plaintiff raises serious concerns about the UPF industry and its effect on children's health, but the law does not allow for courts to hold an entire industry liable. Quote, a plaintiff seeking to hold producers of food liable in tort must show the products they consumed caused the harm they suffered. This creates a unique challenge for plaintiffs like Martinez, who consumes a large number of products over a lengthy period of time. Lawsuits against ultra-processed food makers have claimed their products are scientifically engineered to be addictive and that companies took a page out of the tobacco industry's playbook when marketing them to children. While consumer lawsuits are now hitting new roadblocks, food makers still face another major legal test after San Francisco filed the first government lawsuit against the industry. So it'll be interesting to see and watch here. We covered this a year ago when the Maha movement was at its peak, maybe a year and a half ago now. And I just wanted to give a little quick follow-up that, there is some issue with suing the food industry in terms of ultra-processed foods. I think it's a more, structural issue overall that we need to contend with our food systems. But I don't know if it was a quick follow-up, Justin, of a story we covered. And I know sometimes, I pride our show on following up on things that we've covered in the past. And so this is maybe a closing of the book for this certain lawsuit. We'll see if the governmental lawsuit in San Francisco has any meaning. But any thoughts on this litigation or failure to have legal action be taken against the food industry?
It's really hard, right? Because these companies have these probably large legal, parties that they bring into situations like this. And it does kind of butt up against this idea of libertarianism, like people having the right to choose what they want to do and ingest. I think that it's difficult here too, because you have something like, I think we've covered the red 40 dye stories in the past, where you can point to a single ingredient and you could say, like nicotine or tobacco or alcohol is another example here, where you can point to this single ingredient being present in insert the food category. It's not even a food category. It's like, when this is present in this particular dose, it requires this particular label to be on the package, but it doesn't. There might be an age gate to it, but it does not turn into something where we outlaw the sale of it, at least here in the U.S. People still have the ability to buy what they want, and you might have to show your ID, but you are taking the risk here, and it is a dose problem, right? I will have a Kraft single on a cheeseburger, but it's not something where I'm eating 2 of those a day. Do you know what I mean? They're same thing with soda. You know what I mean? There is a dosing problem when you will have some any of the diet soda studies or peer-reviewed papers talk about the required dose for aspartame to be something that actually impacts you. You need
30 cans
30 cans a
day,
a day, and that's for weeks or months or years, you know what I mean, until you actually see any sort of negative health outcomes there. And then I always kind of get this interesting ultra processed being defined better, being something where, I don't know, you're losing some sort of nutritional potency, or There are, again, side effects that are coming from the amount of processing that's happening here, where, the way that it interacts with your gut or your digestive system actually causes additional problems here. And then it also kind of
it's just so broadly defined. Like to cut in real quick, it's like the protein alternatives. Like a lot of people are like, oh, ultra processed must be bad. Like actually, like no, like some of that is like incredible food science putting it
Yep.
together to make it like a viable product. And it's
or
like
safe or
it was
safer.
processed, yeah, or
Yeah.
safer. It was
Yeah.
processed, but it was processed in a way to make a really like interesting and tasty product for people that maybe don't choose to consume meat. Like so the whole I feel like the whole ultra processed movement is kind of there's ultra processed and like food, but then I do think there is a reality where like obviously like food is addictive. We know this, and like there are areas that struggle with having food security, and like food education is really low in our country. And so all that to say is like it is a really large issue, and I think like obviously taking these steps is an attempt to fix it in some way, but it'll be interesting to see if any movement is made towards the food industry. And like I know the Maha movement has had their peak where this seemed viable, but I don't know. I think that it needs to be more of a structural approach, and where you go from the bottom up than just like labeling it a movement, and kind of doing it for a little bit and then going away from it. Like it just never, for me, I never had any illusions that this would lead to anything more than maybe a couple headlines. So
Yeah, and layering on things like offering alternatives might be a better strategy than like litigating some of these companies into submission. Like to your point on the food access piece, is part of the problem the fact that given the choice of not eating or eating something ultra processed, it's like it's a rock and a hard place for depending on this individual, and sometimes it's financially related. Like and oftentimes some of these health issues, some of the ones aside that are directly kind of tied to diet, but things like other lifestyle factors, like the amount of exercise that you're having or sedentary, like work that you're having to do, like all of this stuff layers on to the fact that the ultra processed food is just one component or facet of the problem. And it can turn preachy, unfortunately, which I think also turns people off in this way that you can't necessarily cut through the noise and, get, there's the Brian Johnsons of the world who are going to go on and tell you that, McDonald's is killing you. And I don't necessarily feel like that even lands in the way that he would hope it would, in his way of kind of like making it low status or trying to guilt you out of, doing this behavior.
I'll share an observation real quick. Is like you follow me on Instagram. My garden's in full swing.
Yeah.
And it's like as great. Like I have a small garden in my backyard. We're having great. Like I've grown really beautiful broccoli, but it's like I've already consumed all of the broccoli in my garden in 1 week. You know what I mean? Like there's so much reliance on this system, and so if the levers aren't moving in certain areas, like you really see how like poor the food availability is and the food choices are. So it's just like it can be very limiting. And I think like the Maha movement and other movements that have like done this, like they don't address the key part that like food access is like probably the more critical role that needs to happen. So
let's go back into conspiracy land here, Ray. This is on the reservation system side of things.
All right.
Matt Newberg from Hungry, a newsletter that I think you and I both subscribe to. Shout out to Matt. He did a fascinating breakdown of some of the recent developments in the reservations space. And we've been covering a lot of these stories on the show already. And I've kind of been behind the scenes building Chef Tech Stack for you folks, not a reservation platform, but something else to kind of talk about the tech tools that you're using and get insights from what other operators are leveraging. And so shout out there. If you want to get some insights, please send me a DM or an email. I want to share some of his findings here and see if you folks, and Ray, you as well, have any thoughts here. So first off, Ray, did you know that DoorDash acquired SevenRooms?
Mm-hmm. I did know this.
Okay, so a year ago, for almost $1.2 billion, I had to refresh my memory here because like the shuffling around and the acquisitions are almost like dizzying in the frequency and the number of them that are happening here. So SevenRooms is owned by DoorDash, and they launched something 2 weeks ago called Channel Connect. And so we'll put a visual up on screen to help kind of get you to see this visually. It's this like on one side, it's booking platform A and booking platform B for those that are listening audio only. And they're kind of sending these nodes across with like, this is a no-show and it's a four-top. This person booked. This person has just been seated. This person canceled. And all of these things from, let's say, booking platform A is OpenTable and booking platform B is Resi. And all of these data points are being sent into Channel Connect, which is like this rotating circle. And then that is going out in its own set of nodes to what they're calling your system with two-way sync enabled. And so it's kind of this idea that you don't have to pick if you're just going to have Instagram take reservations for you or OpenTable. You can actually have multiple. And the problem historically has been all of these reservations and booking slots and the information that happens inside of these platforms with no-shows and cancellations and allergy requests. And we have this table available at the bar and there's only 2 seats now. And oh my goodness, we had this double booked, or we didn't have it booked and it wasn't showing on this platform. And so we lost that table. None of that talked to one another. And so it was very difficult, and you were kind of forced to choose which booking platform and reservation service you wanted to use. And the basic premise here is, quote, that it synchronizes reservations across platforms in real time and consolidates them into a single system of record. That means your team can manage service from one place with clear and accurate views of availability at all times, end quote. And so Matt kind of draws an interesting series of dots and then writes to connect them in the newsletter here. And he says that Channel Connect makes table inventory portable, which DoorDash will then use to grow its reservation marketplace. And that's the Trojan-horse reference that he's talking about here, because it'll then use every other reservation platform to supply DoorDash reservations. And then it still presents itself as a neutral restaurant infrastructure component. And so he touches on the fact that they're literally trying to learn from previous mistakes that DoorDash has experienced. There was a snafu with this company called Olo, O-L-O, maybe it's Olo, which ended up trying to do the same middleware layer maneuver with restaurant delivery. And so DoorDash is saying, instead of having someone else come in and do that, why don't we own this ourselves and see if we can basically become the Olo of reservations? And so their other aim, obviously here, as we've talked about on the show before, is to own the customer data. Because in addition to a reservations marketplace, SevenRooms was a CRM, or a client relationship manager, for restaurants to keep track of guests. That was like their calling card, is that we will give you more insights into who's a big spender on wine. And then you can use that in your operations or your table service or your steps of service to make sure that you're greeting this person with a complimentary glass of champagne, or you're giving them sending a particular sum over to that table because this person has bought a $2,000 bottle of wine with us on a previous visit. And so if DoorDash can own that data, it can increase the LTV, the lifetime value of that person, by marketing them. And this is my conspiracy hat coming on. This isn't like that revolutionary of an idea, but it's like the more data you have on somebody, the better your marketing can be, because you have more information that you can use to target things properly. And so outside of that dinner that they booked, you can, suggest another date night for that particular person or couple. And so in addition to attracting new restaurants to the platform, because look how informed we can make you with our customer data set, it just all starts to paint this really interesting picture of how they're deciding to really build this. And again, like the Trojan horse analogy is just really interesting here. And so he goes into some very nerdy reading of the privacy policies here too, on both SevenRooms, and then the language used on the OpenTable website, touching on how it reads versus what it's actually trying to do or say. And he uses words like pre-litigate in the newsletter, because, I don't know, all of this is just super interesting when you see all of these like AI product demos of, okay, our product will help you to plan a vacation or discover new places in your city. And all of this is kind of powered by this tech infrastructure that, I don't know, was like inconceivable, or like actually couldn't be built in the way that things were siloed before. And it caused a lot of problems. But as the tech is getting better, I've kind of predicted this on our end of 2025 show for something to pay attention to for 2026. It is something that like we're finally seeing play out in an example like this. And I wasn't exactly seeing this coming. I honestly thought that there was going to be either a pricing thing or something else that one of these platforms was going to do to kind of like take bigger market share. And it's actually segmented, right? Like it's fragmented and it's decentralizing in a way where you can actually use whichever one, but it's all DoorDash. And maybe you can argue that like, okay, well, it is centralizing to DoorDash. I don't know, like maybe it's not, but this kind of runs counter to what we've kind of covered on the show, Ray, previously in episodes with exclusivity on some of these platforms, where I literally got an email from a 1 Michelin star restaurant in New York. And it's like, hey, we are exclusively offering reservations on DoorDash now. And this is like, hey, we're not using XYZ service anymore. If you have a reservation coming up with us in the next 3 months, you can, you can still use that service. Or I think it was migrated over. But this broader rejection from operators to this idea of lock-in is maybe what's contributing to this. And then you combine that with the speed at which features can be shipped by some of these software companies, and then you decrease the loyalty to one specific platform. and then you increase the, like the brand equity that it has with the consumer. I think this is going to be the reality of the landscape going forward. You're not going to have to decide whether you go with OpenTable or whether you go with Resi. You will literally just have both. They will be forced to compete on cost, and it will just be negligible or basically the same to have accounts on both platforms. And then those individual platforms will do their own marketing tactics to try to get the partnership credit with the credit card companies to get customers to spend with them. But that's might just be the flavor of the week that the customer is deciding to use, because they will change so fast now, Ray. I don't know if you've had this experience with, like, maybe you're using Claude and then the Claude model sucks, and so I'll switch to ChatGPT. I'll just export my data and bring it over. Like, it doesn't, you don't have that lock-in, that loyalty anymore in the way that we used to have, because the tech tools are so good. And it's just like the switching cost for operators has been so fatiguing. I've spoken with some of you folks on coaching calls before on some of this stuff of like, oh man, like I think like talk shutting down is like a big deal for some operators, because we built all this stuff on talk, and now we have to migrate over. And so if you folks have thoughts on this, or if you're currently kind of like navigating one of these decisions, I'm going to be talking about a lot of the stuff in Chef Tech Stack, and like trying to host some workshops on this, because I think it's going to save you folks money, and it's going to make your businesses a little bit more streamlined. And so if you have thoughts on this, like, please sound off in the comments, either on Spotify or on YouTube. But Ray, I don't know if you have thoughts here on this development.
You had a quote here where it's basically saying like it's going to be negligible or basically the same for having to compete on cost. I just wonder like what the outcome is going to be, right? Like we've talked about the ChatGPT, the Claude, like the going into the reservation systems. It almost seems like it could become very monopolistic over the next few years.
Like you're saying two DoorDash will be more monopolistic. Yeah.
Yes. Going toward it. Like it's all going to revert back to this one system. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see.
So like what's interesting to me is like if you open the DoorDash app now, you actually have you can kind of see where their roadmap is going based on the number of like the tabs that they present you as a user when you log in. It's like when you go to order from a restaurant on DoorDash, you have the option to do delivery, pick up, or dine in now. It's like a new thing where they will literally offer you a DoorDash credit to scan a code when you're at a particular restaurant that has DoorDash as a platform. And so that's just something where I think they're trying to own like eating. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that like it seems like so gargantuan, but which I can agree with you is the monopolistic side of things, but it is. They're actually not trying to compete with Resi and OpenTable. They're trying to compete with like the 3 meals you're eating throughout the day as a human. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you eat breakfast at home, DoorDash wants a slice of that because they want you to order the ingredients that you're making that breakfast with through DoorDash. And then if you're going out to lunch, you and I go out to lunch after this episode, they want us to scan that code at the restaurant that gives us a DoorDash credit. And then when I come home and I want to order dinner for my wife and I, we also do that delivery through DoorDash. Like in a perfect world, I think that's what they're going for, which I certainly agree with you feels like monopolistic. I'm more talking about like they're seeing the Resi and the OpenTables of the world being like some pipes that they can use to make sure that, the restaurants then, use that stuff. And that I think is like going to get competed away to the lowest common denominator because features are so easy to copy now. And it's again, like that's why I talked about the loyalty piece. I just don't think the loyalty is there. Like people are thinking about cost, people are thinking about features, people are thinking about uptime and reliability, and like what's the experience for a customer to kind of go through one of these processes of booking a table. And I still have yet to see a better hospitality driven way to book a table in a way that I was maybe predicting, but there's still 6 months left out of the year. Like there might be some fatigue on these, API, MCP integrated systems here where people might get, burnt out of this and somebody can come in with a more high touch version and blow people out of the water.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Last quick hit story for me, I think today is kind of a old story. This came across my feed and it was kind of funny because it was like very clearly an AI slop piece, but it was an interesting lesson that I just wanted to. I don't want to focus on the image or even the writing is very clearly AI written, but it is talking about this idea of Shake Shack's strategy in 2025 And basically this idea of not focusing on the product, but focusing on operations and how they were able to increase both revenue and profit across some of these locations and in the business as a whole, with the headwinds of beef prices going up that you have covered specifically on the show. And so again, apologies for the AI slop that I'm about to read you, but it provides some important context. Beef prices went up for everyone. Shake Shack grew profits anyway. Here's what most people are missing about how they did it. Such a clear signal that this was an AI written piece. The kiosk is the real story. When Shake Shack moved to self-ordering screens, checks went up by a high teens % compared to cashier orders. Same customer, same burger. Just a screen quietly asking if they wanted to add bacon or upsize their shake. Nobody rushes at a kiosk. Nobody feels awkward saying yes. And that incremental revenue on every single transaction is doing a lot of the work against rising beef costs that would otherwise crush the margin. On top of that, they rebuilt how they staff at every location, cutting the costs to build new restaurants by 20%, diversified their supply chain so they are not fully exposed to commodity swings, and grew to 659 locations, which gives them purchasing leverage most restaurant operators could never touch. Revenue up 15%, profit margin up, 85 new locations opened, all in a year when restaurant traffic was down industry-wide and beef kept getting more expensive. The product did not change. The business model got sharper, and that gap between operators who figure that out and operators who are still running the same way they did in 2019 is only going to get wider. And that's kind of like the gist of what I wanted to cover in this specific story. It's kind of funny because if you look at Shake Shack's price since 2025, if I just look at the chart for the past year, it's down 59.98%. So the stock is down 60%, down from almost $150 to $50, which, maybe is a funny swing the other way of like, okay, well, you're crushing it one year and then the next year you're not doing so well. That's maybe, the opposite end of this argument is like, okay, maybe you grew too fast. But I did want to focus on this because I think chefs in particular sometimes look at problems with profitability, problems with guests coming in, problems with, we need more revenue. They will look at product development, i.e. changing the menu more, like R&D, more innovation on, bringing in, like we need to start serving Wagyu, we need to start having a caviar supplement as the solve. And in reality, or maybe not in reality, but like an example, like that's why I talk about the word case study on this show a lot, because Ray and I are very infrequently prescriptive on the stuff that we'll share. You'll notice even in some of the advice that I'll share in the Reddit posts, it's like, I want you to ask these questions to yourself. I will not often tell you exactly what to do. And I try to use that approach in my coaching stuff because I think it's a better way to kind of like make sure that answer feels like it's coming from you as opposed to like me telling you exactly what to do. Because it's very infrequently like one singular right answer. Like you have multiple, approaches towards solving some of these problems. But I think when you have an organization as large as Shake Shack, it is an interesting idea where people look at certain business models and they're saying, okay, like consumers are having kiosk fatigue. You're taking the hospitality out of some of these things. You and I have gushed before about the hospitality experiences you can have at certain Shake Shack locations because there is a level of consistency. And when the human does engage with you at one of these locations well, it can deliver a higher quality experience because that person is freed up to do the thing that is more human interactive as opposed to being the person who's going to tap at the screen in front of you and ask you some of these questions, which I do think that, like the reason that you won't upsize your shake is because you don't want the shame of somebody seeing you order a large shake in person in conversation. And so I'm saying this as a case study on if you think the problem is your menu, if you think the problem is your dish, maybe you don't need to change that. Maybe there are other levers you can pull, details you can focus on that might actually move the needle more in the organization. And that's sometimes hard for chefs to hear because they kind of really focus on this idea of like, well, the food is the product. And that's why I talk about this idea of zooming out and focusing on the experience itself as the product. And if you can do things to really optimize here, your stock will go down 60%. Just kidding. It is this funny thing that maybe you can focus on other things. I don't know if you had thoughts on this, not the AI slop written piece of it all, but we covered the beef prices being this headwind, but like you can look at this data point and say that not every single business suffered because of it.
Yeah, no, I think I may have covered this story in a sense. I don't think I covered the the kiosk portion, but it was a call out that like Shake Shack they did manage that headwind. I'd be interested to see what has caused their decline this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's the headlines that show up when you search the stock ticker are not great, and so I think you just gotta kind of pay attention to. I don't know, maybe it's a buy right now. I know that it was kind of hilarious. Like two or 3 days after we covered Beyond Meat, they like had a 40% like stock price increase because I think I don't know, Wall Street Bets found it and decided to increase it. It was just kind of funny. The stock buying and the actual operating of a business are two very different things.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about this last quick hit on borrowing against cheese?
Yeah, I found this very interesting. This came from Bloomberg, but it's on Yahoo Finance. Interesting sharing there. So basically, the title is Italy's oldest dairy taps new way to borrow against cheese. So going to say that Italy's oldest dairy company has borrowed money against cheese aging in its warehouse, taking advantage of a law change aimed at helping food and wine producers access finance. Brazale SPA, a company founded in 1784, which kudos to them, that's a very long time, raised $11.4 million from Italy's state lender Casa dei Positi e Prestiti and Cherry Bank SPA, backed by products in the maturation process, owner Roberto Brazale said at a press conference on Tuesday. Italian cheesemakers are familiar with inventory financing. Dairies have been depositing wheels of Parmesan in Credito Emiliano's vaults for decades, gaining access to credit that allows them to pay farmers and other costs while they wait for their products to get to market. Brazale's transaction is the first, however, to give financing parties stronger control of the inventory, not just a guarantee over it. It was made possible by changes to Italy's securitization law, which now allows companies to obtain financing on non-registered goods, including food products, raw materials, and manufactured items. Previously, such transactions were limited largely to assets such as real estate and financial receivables. This new framework is designed to let companies deconsolidate these assets from their balance sheet and unlock liquidity tied up in inventory without waiting for products to be sold. Quote, the law now expressly recognizes the use of future receivables, the underlying assets and related rights, processed products, and substitute assets as assets that may be ring-fenced or allocated to the repayment of the securitization transaction. And they just go on to say that for companies with products months or years in the making, from Parmesan and cured meats to wine and other goods, the reforms could open up a new source of financing by turning warehouse inventories into collateralized assets. They go on to say that the hope is to standardize the transaction and replicate it to help many more companies. It could become a new tool to fund small and medium enterprises. Asset-based finance is becoming one of the fastest areas of growth for private credit funds. As competition intensifies in traditional corporate lending, private credit managers are deploying more capital into loans backed by tangible assets and contractual cash flows, including receivables, infrastructure, and equipment. Inventory financing isn't risk-free, however. While cheese, like wine, can appreciate over time, the opposite is also possible. Obviously, things can go wrong and it can be ruined. So I know you have a little bit of an economics background, Justin, so I just figured you'd appreciate this idea that like this law opened up and, I don't know too much about it, but I thought it was interesting that like they're basically depending on the asset of maturing cheese to keep their businesses afloat. So your thoughts?
It's an asset, it is like this thing that you see some of these cheeses that age for dozens of months to up to, 5 years and beyond. I have heard of, and I had to do a quick search to jog my memory on some of the companies that do this for wine specifically, because that is one that is a little bit more, we're talking about the storage conditions being a little bit more tame, and cheeses, depending on the type of cheese, we're talking about Parmesan in particular, like it's pretty robust. Like it's not really something where you're worried about like one particular temperature swing or, moisture being something that is going to totally throw things off, because once it hits a specific age, it is just like the time thing that you're waiting for a flavor to develop in. Some of the companies that came up was Jera Wine, Jera, Wine Cosign, and this is news for me, Sotheby's actually offers this. Specifically, they're talking about private collectors here in the search I did, but they will give you up to $250 million in credit. So like you can unlock a significant amount of liquidity, anywhere from $1 million to over $250 million. And the way that some of these companies work, and the ways that I was kind of reading about them back in the day, I think, was they would actually need to take the wine into their possession and guarantee storage conditions for it. Because it is this thing where I talked about the robustness kind of being there. this is mostly talking about like, like the temperature being as such, and sunlight is a big thing with wine storage as well. And it is one of those things where you have these uncontrolled variables that, like I have stories of people who like they're bringing a bottle of wine to a dinner that they have been closely safeguarding, and they just leave it in their car before the dinner on a hot LA day for a little bit too long, and it is 30 years of aging this wine just totally screwed. Do you know what I mean? And so that is something where maybe it's not as robust as maybe I'm making it out to be. But it is this interesting idea of if you have somebody in the organization that's managing the wine inventory and you're saying like, I have several cases of this and we are actually not selling that much of it on a monthly basis, is there something where you can actually have some advantage here where we need to have a capital injection in the business and we're sitting on these assets? Cheese is new news to me for that as an opportunity. I don't think restaurants in particular are keeping that much of a cheese inventory. But some of these purveyors, if you're an importer, if this is like a bigger part of how you run your operations, it's really cool and interesting to see. And I don't think everybody always sees this. You're doing it as an inventory piece, ideally every month or several times a month. But I know that like the French Laundry included like a cigar section in their wine cellar when they did their renovation, because it was something where they realized like this is an asset we can keep on hand. I don't think they necessarily borrow against it, but it is cool. And I think it really puts into perspective some of these other things that we're covering on the show with like the real estate that your business happens to be sitting on, or, a architecture development or investment that you're going to be thinking about making. It's something where, I don't know, maybe I have to keep that in my back pocket. And if one of you folks asks a question about fundraising, it's like, well, do you happen to have a bunch of cheese lying around that you're interested in putting up as collateral? Just an interesting story. All right, folks, this has been another Repertoire Report on the Repertoire Podcast. My name is Justin Khanna. I'm here with Ray Delucci. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating on the show. You can do it with a quick couple of taps. You can give us 1 star. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can give us 5 stars. We'd love to see those too. And if you're on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to the channel because we're on our way to 3,000 subscribers.
I will say for Spotify, we have crossed over the 50,000 all-time play and download mark for our podcast. So thank you for listening on those platforms as well.
Huge. Thank you folks for listening as always, and we'll see you folks next week.